Welcome to the Desperate Times Resilient Faith podcast. Today we're going to be interviewing Mike Menning, and I think he's got some very interesting things that you will enjoy hearing. Okay, Mike, why don't you start out by just giving us a little bit of background on who you are, and I know you've led a very varied life, all the way from politics to ministry, so can you give us a little thumbnail sketch?
Yeah, thumbnails. Sometimes I use a couple thumbnails. I actually, I'm from Minnesota, the southwest corner of the state, and I was raised on the farm out there, and I was elected to the state house when I was 29 years old.
Wow!
And then on to the Senate in my early 30s. Served a couple terms there. I ran for governor, Minnesota. And obviously I didn't win.
It was probably a blessing.
Yeah, but I really think it's, in the eyes of man, success is not necessarily winning. I mean, it is winning in the eyes of man, but in the eyes of God was I faithful. And from there I went to work with the Christian Reformed Church denomination, and I worked with deacons across the country, and getting deacons to do what they were called to do instead of just being the money counters in that denomination.
They actually did ministry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Take care of the poor, the needs of the poor, and how to reach out and that sort of thing. That was 10 years with a Christian Reformed Church denomination, and then 5 years I was team leader for Eastern Europe missions over there. We headquartered out of Bucharest, Romania. And but I commuted back and forth. I'd make the trip 4 or 5 times a year. We found out it was by design. We tried a new model, and the model was that if I wasn't on location all the time, the nationals would develop much faster.
They had to take ownership.
And they had to take ownership. And in 5 years, we turned it over to them totally.
Wow.
So, and then after that...
What was the years that you were doing that?
I went to work for Christian Reformed World Relief, 1987 I started.
80s. Yeah.
And
Yeah, that was a fairly major move of ministry, overseas ministries during the 80s, because they realized, for one thing, there was no assurance they were going to be able to stay.
That's right.
And in fact, some countries started to remove ministries or missionaries. And when they did, they found out that a lot of the ministries collapsed because they were built around a person.
Yes.
And so there was a fairly major shift across the board. So that was interesting.
Yeah, my first trip in there was with the ministry of Johnny and Friends.
Yes.
Johnny Erickson taught him, and I chaired her board for a number of years, and so we taught churches in Romania how to care for the people with disabilities. People with disabilities in Romania under communism, Ceausescu was the dictator. It was absolutely horrible. So anyway, that all changed. Yeah.
That was during the time that Richard Wurmbrand was being tortured. They were perfecting torture using Christians under him. So you're right in the middle of that.
Yeah. So anyway, we after that, our son had lived in Salt Lake City for a couple of years. He married a girl from this area, and they were established here. And our prayer was that we could be with our grandkids sometime. And so God answered that, and I came to pastor a church here, the Mountain Springs Community Church.
Wow.
That's what brought me to Utah.
So that's a lot of territory to cover. And after you've got here, you've actually been on quite a few bases here. You started that ministry in that church, but you've kind of moved on through 2 or 3 other stopping points. Could you cover some of those?
Well, I say that as clearly as the Lord called me to come and pastor that Mountain Springs Church, it was that clear that He was calling me out of it. And it seems like that was a lot of my life. God used me to start ministries and start things, and so what I did, I didn't know what I was going to do when I left. I just knew the Lord was speaking to me and said, "You need to trust me." And the only thing I could seemed to get out of the Lord was I asked Abraham to move, not knowing where he was going, and I'm asking you to do the same. And it was a scary time. I had diabetes, and I remember one time walking from my little office to the church across that parking lot and just crying out to God, do you really know what you're doing here? I want to follow you, but my diabetes supplies alone was $900, and I had good insurance with the church, and God just asked me to trust Him, and I did. I announced to the congregation I was leaving, and of course the first question is, where are you going? What you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And so the church was really good to me. They paid my insurance. I didn't ask for it. They paid my insurance for a year and a half, and they kept me on the payroll for 3 months, but then God made it clear that I should start a ministry to pastors. And at that time there were a lot of new churches starting here.
Yeah.
And pastors were parachuting in. They was not sent by an agency, and a lot of them found it very, very difficult. And so a lot of them had left. But what we did is we got pastors together in groups, and that they could support each other. And so I was just a pastor to pastors for about another several years, and then that was taken over by Dave Elshog.
By the way, the need for that, we moved here in the 80s, and I joined the ministerial prayer meeting for Salt Lake City here. That was a tough time, because like you say, pastors were coming in, and they were viewing it, well, it's America. And so in most other states, you come, you hang a shingle, and people come, and it's a very short time. You've raised your support and going. Well, Utah is America's foreign mission field.
It is.
We speak English. We shop at the same stores, but it's a foreign country as far as religiously. In fact, Utah is in the middle of what was called the state of Deseret, which included Utah, parts of Arizona, Colorado, Nevada. I went part way into California and then up into Idaho. And it was, they minted their own money under Brigham Young. And so that very same area now is still culturally, in many ways, separate from the U.S. And it's very strongly dominated by the Mormon religion.
It's interesting. I don't know if you remember the Salt Lake Theological Seminary.
Right.
Yeah. They did a study from 1985 until 2000 on the length of stay of pastors of Christian churches for 15 years. And the average length of stay of all Christian pastors in this state was 19 months.
Yeah. In the 80s, there were no support. They came in. By and large, they were just kind of going on a shoestring. They had no outside, finances they brought in. And there for a while, we were losing pastors at the rate of one a month. I know there was one down in the Provo area that we came in our group to pray, and they shared that somebody had put a hose into his basement and filled his basement up with water. And that was the last straw. He said that was it. And so we started as a ministerial group encouraging people to bring money with them, bring support with them, because it took a while to get them used to the idea that this is foreign missions. You have to treat it as foreign missions. And so when you came along, that was a huge role that you played to start networking these, because they were pretty isolated, and when you're isolated and you're in the middle of hostile territory, it's easy to take you down.
One of the things we found is I really prove the point that Satan works in different ways in different areas on different mission fields. And we found that the attack on Christian pastors in this state is very similar to that of what was happening in Romania and Nigeria and other parts of Africa, Kenya. and that is demonic dreams at night. It was
Oh, yeah.
it was that was one of the things that we dealt with maybe the most. Is sometimes the pastor would just be terrified at night, and sometimes it'd be the pastor, sometimes it'd be the pastor's wife, and even the pastor's kids. And so we saw that same thing in Africa. We saw it in Romania, in other parts of Eastern Europe. But I've never run into that in the United States before.
Yeah. I didn't have it personally, but the pastor of our church, I remember one day he came in, and it was early on. He moved from Michigan and came in. And I remember one time he came in, and he was spooked. He was shocked. And he had shared that he had had basically a demonic dream where Satan faced him that night and said, "This is my territory." And it impacted him.
Yeah.
But you're right. Our house, we had to do exorcisms whenever we would move, because our kids had started having dreams. And people would see things walking down the hall, and we'd do an exorcism, and it was gone. But it's very common here.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And there are other parts in the United States where that
Probably,
happens, but I don't know of anyone. I'm not an expert in the area, but I know a lot of our work was just sitting down with the pastor and the pastor's wife, and just talking about how to deal with that, because I've experienced a lot of it myself. And the way we taught, and several others that had worked foreign countries before, we teach them that when it happens, and when you wake up, just jump out of bed right away. And for me, it was head to the couch, and I got on my knees in front of the couch and just prayed in the name of Jesus to cast them out, and to leave us alone. And God is faithful.
Yeah, but sometimes the demon actually lays on their chest and pins them. They can't move.
Yeah.
We had
choking.
Choking. We had one pastor that worked in the European area, and he had kind of a ministry here to the covens, to the people who were involved in cultic worship here. And at one time, one of them came out, and he got blew back on that. He literally had coven members walking up and down the sidewalk in front of him, pronouncing curses. So it's and I mean, we could go on for that. There's a lot of things that are unique to Utah. But okay, so what happened after you kind of cut ties and launched out into the deep there?
Yeah. What I did is I made a trip down south, got together with some friends of ours. We had mentored them from Romania, and we met in St. George. And I was just leaving St. George one day, and in fact, my wife was with me, and got a call from another ministry here holding out help if I could swing into Colorado City. And for those who are not familiar with it, Colorado City is Colorado City, Arizona, and then Hilldale, Utah. It looks like one town, but the state line runs directly through that town. And she asked if I would swing into Colorado City to pick up a young man, and he had to get out within 1 to 2 hours, or they would miss him and they'd track him down.
Now, Colorado City had been heavy in the news just prior to that.
Yes.
Due to a particular person.
Yes. Warren Jeffs was the prophet of what's called the FLDS, and that's the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. And at the time that the Mormon Church made a decision that they would not allow polygamy in their church, then there were numerous splinter groups that just scattered. And there was a group that went down to Hilldale, Colorado City, and they wanted to be directly on the state line. And that was back in the early 1900s. and so they started that community, and that community of Hilldale, Utah, Colorado City, Arizona, was totally closed off to the public for many years, and it was starting to just open up.
In fact, if you drove in there, what happened?
Well, if you drove in, you would, chances are within 4 to 5 minutes, you'd be pulled over by the city marshal. And no one from the outside was allowed to come in. And it's a town of 12,000 people. And they have military quality cameras set up that they could zero right in on the license plate. And then they had over 100 other cameras set up. Their surveillance system there was incredible.
Now, this is back in the 80s and 90s.
No, this is 2010.
10, okay.
2010, 2011, and so the surveillance center, which was a pretty large building, it was manned 24 hours a day. They would immediately call the town marshal, and the town marshal the camera would follow the car, and he'd pull you over and he'd ask the question, "What are you doing here? Who do you want to see?" Mm-hmm. And if you'd say, "Well, I'm just traveling through. I just want to look at town," and he'd say, "You're going to travel right out of here as fast as you came in." And if you objected, he would arrest you and throw you in the county jail.
Yeah.
Yep.
And by the way, the judge was polygamist.
Yeah.
The police were polygamists,
Yep.
and so, yeah, there was not much appeal.
No, and you could win it, but they had lots of money back in them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had large amounts of money that cult was worth. And then Warren Jeffs himself, some of the reports say 65 wives. His son Roy, his oldest son, lived with us for a while. He fled from the community. He finally got out. And he told me the actual correct number of wives was 84. Mm. And, of course, a lot of them
were the ages?
Young girls. Roy told me that the youngest one that he knew of had given birth just before her 12th birthday. Mm. She was 11 years old when she gave birth. And many of them were young children, and eventually the FBI found out, and they got involved, and then Warren Jeffs went underground, and it took he was on one of the 10 most wanted list in the United States, and it took them 3 years to find him.
People who lived during that time remember, the images coming out of the compound, I believe it was in Colorado, where they had come in there and separated the families. And
he had I think 5 compounds. He had one in South Dakota, at Rapid City, South Dakota, just south of there, and he had another one up in the mountains in Colorado. The big one was in Texas, and that's where
that's the one.
That was the one.
Yeah.
And they what happened is the FBI caught him, and they caught him out at Las Vegas, mm-hmm. and he had such strict rules for his followers. But when they found him, he was coming out of Las Vegas. He always had a driver. He never drove himself, but he was in the back seat with one of his favorite wives, and they both had shorts on, and it was quite shocking news to the people in Colorado City. But anyway, they captured him. He went to trial, and he was tried here in Utah, and he was found guilty of taking 11 and 12-year-olds as wives. Mm-hmm. An incredible book that really, a lot of books have been written about the area, but there's one that, if you really want to know, there's a very good book. It's called Prophets Pray, Prey, written by Sam Brower. I
haven't read it, but people that have said it's tough reading.
Yeah, part of it is really tough.
What they go through.
Yeah. Sam is a private detective, and it was the work of Sam. He and a guy by the name of Roger Houle. Roger was an attorney here, is an attorney yet in Salt Lake City. and they got him to trial. They convicted him. They put him in prison here in Utah, and within a matter of days they let him go again because some technicality on instruction to the jury, and so they let him go. However, he didn't get far. When he walked out of the Utah prison, the Texas Rangers were there to pick him up, and they picked him up, took him down to Texas, and they tried him there for crimes in Texas at the compound.
Texas doesn't cut a lot of slack.
No, don't mess with
Don't
Texas.
mess with Texas.
And he got a sentence of life plus 20 years.
Wow.
And I just talked to someone down in Colorado City a short time ago, and this guy had been an informant for the FBI for many years, and he told me that the FBI has told him that Jeff's mind is pretty much gone at this point. I mean, in all reality, I think his mind was gone before, but he doesn't think
but cognitively
properly.
he's gone.
Yeah.
Now he was, even though he was in jail, he was still running the compound.
He ran it for many years.
Colorado City.
Yep. He ran it for many years, and now there's 4 or 5 different. It has splintered into 4 or 5 different groups, and of course they're fighting for the money, and they're fighting for the tithes. At one time, the organization, the FLDS, was worth well over $1 billion, and they owned all the property in that town. 98% is in that town.
But you could never tell it driving through because the homes were in. Well, tell them about it.
Well, the town is maybe the trashiest town I've ever been in. It was when I first started going there 10 years ago, and I just retired a few weeks ago from that ministry, that particular ministry. I'm still working with people that have come out, and I'm mentoring them. But the town, when I first got there, it's kind of interesting. I was driving a red truck. I always had my red pickup, and I'd go into town, and they'd know I was there right away because the color red was outlawed,
forbidden
in that town. And because they said Jesus was going to come back and would be wearing a red robe. And so when I came in with my red pickup, I'd stick out like a sore thumb, But at first, where the ministry started, a young man, Brody Olson, Brody and Liz, just out of seminary, moved in there and to start a church. And so Brody and I have worked very closely to start a church and another ministry to the people. But another thing that I did those first years is we did a lot of child rescue. The same attorney that tried Warren Jeffs, Roger Houle, and several attorneys were involved. But Roger and myself and Sam Brower, we worked very close together. And the FLDS for a number of years had kicked out the mothers. And a lot of people don't know about this, but they kicked out the fathers, were sent off to do work other places in some of their many construction companies. And the mothers were sent off, and the mothers were told that if they ever came back and tried to claim their children, that they would go to hell, and so would their children. And then after 2-3 years,
can't imagine the pressure that put them under.
2-3 years, they came back, and they would contact Roger or me, and they found out that legally they could get their kids back. And so the three of us, we did a lot of child rescue for a number of years.
Being legal and being in reality is two different things.
Yeah.
When you got a group there that it does not give up easy.
Yep. So that's kind of how the work started, and then after that, what I did is just a lot of one-on-one, and the moms. See, they had a couple hundred children that were being raised as the church children, and that was a part of Warren Jeff's dream, is that they would raise these children as the church children and kind of create a super race within their organization. But we would take the moms and the kids back, and we in the Salt Lake area and throughout Salt Lake County and up into the mountains, we had homes where we would put those moms and the kids, and then we would move them sometimes every couple of weeks, sometimes in a few days, because the FLDS would hire private detectives to find out where they were. We had one guy come into our house, just didn't knock nothing, and just wanted to know where so and so was. So we kept moving them around. It's sort of an underground road.
They would literally kidnap them and bring them back, and then once they're in there, they disappear. They would go to one of the compounds. They would,
And some of his wives, some of his wives have disappeared. And I was talking to
interesting term for that down there. It's called poofing.
Yeah, they poof. They poof.
They go poof.
Yep, and they're gone. I mean, and that's an accepted reality within that community. That's the way it was. There was a guy I worked with down there. I mentored him. I put more time and energy into him and his family than maybe
I remember that guy. When I went down there, we worked together on other projects.
Yeah, and his daughter poofed.
Really?
His oldest. I don't know if we're talking about the same guy, but he was from the FLDS.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just a fact of life,
mm-hmm.
and he just accepted that. And his daughter was a wife of Warren Jeffs. Sam Brower told me a while back. He said there's four, maybe six, that he has spent huge amount of time trying to track down, and he said they poofed.
Yeah.
And I imagine they were killed somewhere along the way. And the FLDS got away with it.
The ultimate.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And actually, we could go on, you know, because this really just scratches the surface of the ministry that has gone on down there. And would you be willing to go for another session?
Sure.
On this? Okay. We'll break it off here, and next time we'll pick it up. We'll continue recording, but we'll put it up the following week. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this, I would encourage you to share it with others and join our email list where we can notify you of upcoming programs. Go to the DesperateTimesResilient.Faith.com website, and there's other resources there that also back up the podcast as far as helping you in your faith. So until then, love God and love others.